Game one is in the books, and it went as many expected, with the Heat getting blown out by the Celtics as Miami's top scorer struggled for much of the game. And despite a late comeback that really didn't matter, it never got particularly close. But is it just a matter of time for Miami and they're simply delaying the inevitable? We break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, it's credentialed Heat media member David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Recording this after Miami's 114-94 loss to the Celtics in Game 1 in Boston, even though the Heat made some Celtics fans nervous a little bit later in this game. This one was decided pretty early. The Celtics go up 14-0 to start the game. They lead wire to wire. They led by as many as 34 points. This was never actually close, David, and I think we have to have a conversation now and decide how we want to talk about this series, because the Heat, there is no Jimmy Butler. Doesn't seem like Terry Rozier is coming back. Even Duncan Robinson, he returned, but still is kind of. Spo won't admit it's a minutes restriction, but it kind of feels like it still is a little bit. They're young, like the Heat, like whoever they have left. This is a young team, you know,
Sure.
and we can have the conversation about, hey, it's really cool that some of these young guys are getting this experience, and we could talk about the series and these games in that way, or we could talk about it with the expectation of what this series has been in the past, which was, you know, the expectations of it being very competitive. So this game wasn't very competitive. So I don't know. I'm kind of trying to figure out how we want to even talk about this in like a realistic way that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, no, I get it. I think you can do both, to be honest with you. I'm looking at it and saying, to your first point, it's good that we see these younger players get that kind of experience and everything else. Like Nikola Jovic played okay. The numbers might not necessarily bear it out. Jaime Jaquez was spectacular, and I think he showed that he could definitely be a dangerous secondary player, although he was Miami's top scorer, one of Miami's top scorers, and he did a really good job of attacking and pressing the pace and doing everything that we've seen him do over the course of the year. If there was any concerns that he was hitting a rookie wall, as he had late in the season, or that he was dealing with lingering injury, he looks to be at 100%, and he was an absolute gamer, and he looked fantastic. And I think he looked really, really competent in the Jimmy Butler light role that he's expected to carry over. And it just kind of shows that maybe the games would have been very, very different, despite what a lot of Celtics fans say publicly, had Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier been available, because then all of a sudden you've got two very good scorers, guys that have performed well in the playoffs, et cetera. And then you have Jaime coming off the bench to provide this kind of production. That certainly shifts things in Miami's favor. So I think,
can we stay there with Nico and Jaime then? Because I was going to bring this up later, but since you mentioned it, like a few more points on that. Like Jaime, it was a rough start to his first career playoff game. He got scored on 3 times in a row, basically. But then that would break some rookies, right? In the face of, hey, not only did I just get scored on 3 times in a row, but my team is down like 20 points by the time I blinked.
Right.
And that did not scare him away. If anything, it invigorated him, and he just started going at Boston's defense. Yep. I thought he had a play in the third quarter where he just weaved like between the entire Celtics defense in transition and went right to the basket. Nikola Jovic did the same thing, where, you know, he was doing all that stuff where he just like out sprinted the entire Boston defense and then finished through contact after getting a rebound on a coast to coast. And that's the stuff that when we were going into this game, after we had this conversation on Saturday morning when we knew that the Heat were advancing to the playoffs to play the Celtics, and we're like, hey, like no Jimmy Butler and all this stuff. Obviously, tough draw there, but this lineup is going to be interesting because it is going to be able to play fast. And I actually didn't think they played very fast at all in this game, except for those spurts that were led by Jaime and Jovic. And so I thought they were really good in this game. So I guess I was trying to save like the silver lining part of this for later. We just sort of got it out of the way early. But that's it. I mean, this game was just so not competitive, and I just don't see the way with the injuries. And man, you know what? It was weird, like the first few minutes watching this game and Jimmy Butler not being on the court.
Yeah.
I think I might have taken that for granted, like how weird this was just going to be to watch a Heat Celtics playoff game and Jimmy Butler's not involved. That was strange to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they've had him miss games in the past, like last year during the ECF, he missed a game, and
Yeah.
that's he incurred injury last year and everything else, but they had maybe not necessarily a deeper team because I think this team is still deeper, but I think a more experienced group certainly, guys that had been there before and been in these kinds of battles specifically against Boston.
And he was able to put his imprint already on those series. Like he was still a presence in that
Yes.
series. Like it was his
Yes.
absence that was so jarring. Like it felt
Right.
like a new, like for example. So I made the point about the Heat being young. The average age of their starting lineup is 24.2. That's younger than the Pacers. That's only
It's
slightly
really
older.
young.
That's less than a year older than the starting lineup of the Orlando Magic. I mean, this is what
Right.
we're talking about versus a Boston Celtics team whose average starting lineup is almost 5 years older than.
Yeah.
And so this is what it felt like that in this game with Jimmy Butler's absence being so prevalent. It was like, oh wow, I know that Bam and Caleb and Tyler have playoff experience, but they're all still young players,
Sure.
right? And so
Sure.
it felt like a new, like in a weird way, like a peek into maybe like a new era, like that may or may not exist. We don't know, but like it's just
Yeah.
like a peek into a window of like a what could have been. Almost, it was just weird. It was almost like surreal, you know?
It would. That describes it pretty well. I understand that standpoint, and I think I mentioned this in Saturday's recap of the win over the Bulls. There was very little chance of Miami being able to win today's game one. Like for all the expectation and maybe unrealistic hope from Heat fans that they could go into Boston, the short turnaround, the fact that they played 2 games over the last week or so, that this Boston team was fully rested and healthier than they've been all season long, etc. Like none of that bodes well for Miami. The slate is now kind of blank for both teams. It's kind of cleared, and now you have the same amount of time to rest and recover and prepare for game two. And given that, I like Miami's ability to make adjustments because you know that Erik Spoelstra is not going to sleep tonight, and he's probably not going to sleep tomorrow, and he's going to go over everything possible to make whatever changes are necessary. And I think the players will accept this. And I think those younger players, Jovic and Hawkins, for all the strengths that they showed later on, I think they were a little shell shocked at again the first taste of playoff experience as a starter. Like that's a lot to expect for those guys. Neither of them probably should be in the starting lineup. Maybe Nico because of he's been playing that role over the last few weeks of the regular season, but still Jaime, an older rookie maybe, but still in the playoffs for the very first time, starting against the Boston Celtics. That's an enviable role or task for anybody to try and overcome, and yet they did okay, and they did well individually. And I think they weathered the storm as well as they could be expected. They did cut the lead down despite that 14-0 deficit to start the game. They did cut it down to 3 at one point, I want to say, in the second quarter. But then eventually Boston was able to blow up. And there were weaknesses there. Like Miami's defense was not great. Their zone didn't work, especially during those times where they were overhelping on defense and not covering a guy like Sam Hauser and leaving him wide open. He missed his first 2 3-pointers, then hits his next 4, and he was wide open on all those attempts. You can't do that. You can't afford to leave him open. I think he was a huge difference maker. I know everybody's going to look to Tatum and Brown and whatever their production was, but to me, I think Hauser was really the difference maker on top of that 14-0 stretch to start the game.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can't do this, right? And maybe I'll get pilloried for this, but you take away that 14-0 stretch, you take away that output by Hauser, which was totally unexpected, and Miami's certainly going to be much more competitive than this, but that doesn't matter, right? The reality is that those things did happen.
You're right, and the defense was a little bit. I don't know if this was just because they had been playing for a week in real, obviously a do or die scenario just a few hours ago, basically against the Chicago Bulls, and the Celtics have been off for the better part of a week, and really, if we're talking about it, like mentally, they've been off for almost 2 weeks. And so they looked like the team that was more fresh. The Heat, either they were overhelping or sometimes they were too late on the closeouts. The ones that were in the corner, they were really late. The ones at the top of the key, they were overhelping. That zone, Cooper Moorhead from MiamiHeat.com had this. He's like, there's a reason why they've only played 15 possessions of zone in their 4 games against the Celtics all season. It's because it doesn't work. The whole idea of the zone is coax your opponent into shooting threes. Well, guess what? The Celtics are the best 3-point shooting team in the league. They love taking threes. They don't need any coaxing. They're just going to do it. And when they took 18 3-pointers in the first quarter and Miami took only 4, we can have whatever kind of conversation we want. That math does not add up, right? You could talk about Sam Hauser or whoever, because somebody on Boston's taking the threes. It's either Sam Hauser or somebody else. And the Heat are just not going to be able to keep up with the Celtics if they are shooting even average and at that much higher of a frequency from 3-point range. It just isn't going to work. So we're going to talk about the game plan. I thought there was a big problem with the Heat's game plan, why the Celtics game plan worked so well in game 1, and then some adjustments that they can make for game 2. We'll do that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there. Heck, we were just there a few minutes ago. Either as a player, as a fan, it's halftime, the scoreboard is not looking good, you're feeling low, you're not sure whether you or your team can put out a win, and that's when you dig deep. You lift your head up and you say to yourself, well, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can, because that's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's a Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. And there's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. Who doesn't love that? And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard together. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or on Google Play. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. It's a great place to buy tickets with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Where you're looking for a concert, a comedy show, Major League Baseball, the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, you'll find them all on Game Time. And again, so many great deals. You'll find them all. Best prices available via Game Time. You can see exactly where you're going to be sitting. If you're in a city, maybe you're not familiar with a venue and you're kind of curious exactly where that is. If you're going to a concert, you don't want to be blocked off. You don't want to have your view obstructed. You know exactly where you're going to be sitting, and you get the best prices available. In some cases, you can even get a better price if you just wait a few minutes after the event starts, because that's when price tickets automatically lower and you'll get the best price available. That's what makes Game Time so convenient. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to some Game 2 adjustments, and we will have a conversation about Tyler Herro here in a second, just a little bit more about what went wrong in Game 1. And David, we're already talking about the Heat. You know, they're playing this series with basically 2 hands tied behind their back. No Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier, so you just got the injuries there. The Celtics are fully healthy. They've got home court advantage. Like, it's such a tough spot for them to be in. But then I'm watching this game and I'm realizing, oh, no, they're even at more of a disadvantage. The Boston Celtics are a really bad matchup for the Miami Heat this year. Everything, all the changes that the Celtics have made with this 5-out offense and how Miami's offense has seemed to devolve instead of evolve over the last few years. It's just the math is almost as big of a detriment as the Jimmy Butler injury in and of itself. It is that bad. When there was a point in this game in the first half where the Celtics had put up 23 3-pointers and the Heat had 5 3-point attempts in the entire game. And when Boston, with all their length now and their defense and what they're able to do, they're single covering Bam Adebayo.
Yeah.
And Bam will have his moments against Kristaps Porzingis, and they're okay with it. Like, and he'll get switched onto like Derek White or something, and he'll just shoot right over him. And the Celtics are saying, fine, shoot as many mid-range attempts. Shoot every mid-range jumper to your heart's desire. We don't care, because every 2-pointer that you hit, we're going to make a 3-pointer on the other end at least. And they know, they got the numbers. Bam's a 40% mid-range jump shooter. That's not Kevin Durant. That's not Michael Jordan. That's not even that good. And he's going to take those shots, and he's not going to get to the rim as much against Boston's length. And the Celtics are going to just say, you can have him. You can have him. Tyler Herro, You can dribble into as many mid-range jumpers as you want. We're going to run you off the 3-point line. We're not going to let you pull up from there. And with the Celtics and their shooters, I just don't know that there's a way for the Heat to keep pace in this series because of what this matchup is.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to shift their defense a little bit. I think that's a big part of it, is not giving up as many threes or contesting those a little bit more effectively than they did today. I think they can shift their rotations a little bit. And maybe that's oversimplifying things, but Kevin Love only playing 13 minutes, Duncan playing only 15 minutes. Like, those are two of your best 3-point shooters at this point. And then realistically, you've got to get more production from the perimeter from the guys that are starting. Niko Jovic, Caleb Martin, and Tyler Herro, all of them struggled from 3-point range. It wasn't great. Like, you're out there presumably, and again, understandably, because you're missing 2 starters. So let's keep that in mind as well. But also, you've got to do something to stretch the floor a little bit and make things easier, where they have to guard you out on the perimeter, and they can't just leave Bam or double him when he does get the ball and make things more difficult for him. He's got to be able to get better opportunities at the rim, especially when he's got this 7'3" obstruction and Kristaps Porzingis. Either way, I think Bam still had a good game, and I think Miami can make changes, but I think it's going to be, you're going to have to get better effort and more production from everybody involved. Yeah. Miami, as you said, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw some numbers out there because we haven't mentioned them. But you mentioned the 3 guys, Jovic, Tyler, and Caleb Martin, 5 for 19 combined from 3-point range. The Heat overall, 12 of 37 from 3-point range. And the only reason they got to 37 is because they were just launching threes in the fourth quarter to try to get back into that game.
Wright.
And DeLon Wright went 5 for 5, and he was good. We'll talk about him later. But that was like sort of empty calories, 37 3-point attempts at the end of that game. And Boston took 49 3-pointers in this one.
Yep.
And they kind of took their foot off the gas. It felt like if they needed to, they could have taken 60, and they would have been a good 60. You mentioned all these things about, like, it's just that Boston, I don't know how much the Heat are going to be able to change things. You're right about the better effort. Like, defensively, especially on the perimeter, you got to be better on the perimeter. You got to take the zone out of this game plan completely. It's not going to work against this Celtics team. To me, well, I'll just ask you the question. You already mentioned this. We know that Erik Spoelstra is going to make adjustments. We know that.
Yes.
But is there an adjustment that the Heat can make to get back into this series?
Not anything simplistic like that. I think it's a combination of all those things that have to be better. Like, you have to get better as a starting group. You have to get more production from your bench unit, and Spo has to tinker with things just so. I also came across, and maybe I'm wrong in doing this, I'm not necessarily taking credit away from the Celtics, but I still think for the most part, there were opportunities for this game, had they been able to, again, avoid that 14-0 deficit, for Miami to have been, for the process to have looked much better than it did. I think you look at this game simply and say, you know what, Miami was blown out early, they were blown out in the middle, and things got away from them late when maybe the Celtics took their foot off the gas. But there were stretches there where, had Miami been able to at least do better, and I put this on Miami. If I'm taking credit away from Boston, I don't think Boston beat Miami so much as Miami beat Miami. I think they did things that took them out of the game. I think a lot of that, it falls on Miami's inability to hit shots from the perimeter, including Tyler specifically. I think a lot of Miami's offense struggled. I think they didn't, do things well as a unit where they could have contended a little bit better and maybe cut the deficit down to 10 at a more crucial time. Again, when you're getting things close, I think from that point where they cut the lead down to 3, after they had come back down from a 14-0 deficit at the end of the first quarter, what they were down 5, I think it was. Like, from that point, then you start giving up those threes to Sam Hauser, and all of a sudden things are much more bleak, and I think that's where you kind of have to tinker, and you can't allow, when you're so shorthanded, you can't allow these little gaps. You can't allow these little gaps in overall effort and production and effort and everything else that comes with it. And I think Miami can do a better job, and I think they will. And I know I'm going to take some heat for this. I think they win game 2. I really do. I still think that. I saw tonight's game, and I saw Boston play well, and I know they've had a great regular season. I know they've got a great starting unit, and I know Miami's still down 2 starters. And given all that, I still like the process of this game from a Heat perspective, and I still think they find a way to win game 2 now that they understand what's at stake and what's coming at them. They were shell-shocked to start the game, and I think they made adjustments throughout, and I think they'll continue to do so over the next couple of days. That will lead to a much more even matchup where they can't pull out a victory in game 2. So I expect this series to return to Miami next weekend with the series tied 1-1.
Okay.
I know you do not. I know you don't. Is there
Not based on what I saw today. And look, if
is
I'm
there
gonna
one
take
thing
your
that you think they could change?
No, there's not a single thing I think they can change. Everything you're asking this team to do, it makes sense. I hear you. Like, yeah, don't give up those threes to Sam Hauser. Don't have better effort on a possession to possession basis. And I just make more just make more shots like the Celtics did. And I guess my thing is, are the Heat capable of doing those things? It's easy to just say it. I don't know that this team, as shorthanded as it is and as young as it is at this point, frankly, and as overmatched as it is from a talent perspective, is capable of doing that for 48 minutes. And all those runs you mentioned, it's fine examples. But there's the whole Celtics game plan is that it pulls away from you. That's the whole thing with the 3-pointers. Yeah, they're going to pull up. Maybe they're a little bit too early in the shot clock, settle for some time. But they're so freaking talented with that offense. And defensively, they don't have to do anything defensively out of their comfort zone. The Heat have nothing to put any amount of pressure on the Celtics. They can cover everybody one-on-one and not over-rotate. And they are not doubling Bam even a little bit. They're not they are just completely in their own comfort zone. It would take a miraculous rate of making contested shots for the Heat to win a game in this series.
I look at Tyler specifically, and maybe that's a problem. You can have whatever production from Caleb, and I know he struggled, and he gets some of the blame for sure. But I think Tyler and what we've seen from him at times over the first few years of his career and what he expected to be able to produce, and a lot of those shots that he missed early on, wide open shots. And if you're going to be that kind of player and you want to have the contract and you want to be known as a guy who steps up in big moments, this is his opportunity to shine. And I think had he been able to shine in those moments, and he did not in game 1, then I think that shifts things where you do have to double him and he can create more opportunities for other players, because we've seen him mix in his playmaking with his shot making abilities. And so I think that opens things up where that kind of forces Boston's defense to play badly and to overcompensate in some ways. And yeah, maybe more often than not that they're talented enough to overcome that. That might be the case for most of the series.
That's not I've been watching the Celtics this year. And they don't really do that. They're not
you think if Tyler hits 5 of those shots early on,
they're just going to keep letting Drew Holiday guard him. They're going to say, hey, tip of the hat. Right. You made him. We're just going to, and that's the thing. I also don't think Drew Holiday gets nearly enough credit for limiting Tyler Herro in this game too. People want to rag on, and he did miss some open jumpers, but he was not comfortable really at any point in this game. When Boston came out and said, we're just going to put Drew Holiday on Tyler Herro, they cut the head off they cut Herro's head off right from the get-go. And that was pretty much it. And you're right. You are right about Tyler Herro. He does need to be better. We're going to keep having this conversation about Tyler Herro in the next segment. But and I have one more point about maybe one other adjustment that I think the Heat do need to make that might be able to get them back in the series. We'll talk about all that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than the projected stats on 2 or more players, and you watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is that easy to use. It's the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Prize Picks is really simple. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. It's that easy. Plus, with quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types, that's what makes Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. So right now, go to prizepicks.com. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get a first deposit match of up to $100. If you download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONBA, that's Locked On NBA, you get a first deposit match of up to $100. That's Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to your listener questions, my one last point on the game 2 adjustment. So the Heat's game plan in this one was, all right, we're going to mix in a little bit of zone here and there. We're going to try to slow this game down. We're going to try to out-physical the Boston Celtics. And it did not work. Not even a little bit. And it doesn't feel like even more effort is going to make that game plan work. It could make that game plan work better, but I don't know that it's going to make it work to the point where winning this series or even multiple games in this series is a realistic outcome. And so I'm looking at this game and I'm like, it reminds me of a college, like the college basketball March Madness tournament. And when you have an under-talented team, a shorthanded team or something like that, going up against basically the Celtics, who are the blue chip of this year's bracket, those teams that kind of make those Cinderella runs are teams that play with a really fast pace. They kind of mix in some weird defenses, but they play with a really fast pace, and they get up a ton of three-pointers. And I actually think that that's the way that the Heat should go in this series, is for like 40 of the 48 minutes of these games, just play Cinderella ball. Just go up there, shoot threes. Haywood Highsmith, sorry, buddy. If you get the ball and you're open early in the clock, you're going to have to take that shot. I actually loved how Nikola Jovic was so willing to take those shots. Like, all those guys, like, just take it. Even if you're going to have to take the semi-contested ones. Like, they're not going to be wide open all the time. But just take them. Just take them and just leave it up to the leave it up to the math. Leave it up to chance. Just keep taking threes. Take more threes than the Boston Celtics, who take the most threes. But in this series, play Cinderella ball. Just jack them up, get up and down. Every time there's a rebound, find Jaime, find Jovic, find Tyler Herro as the trailing three-point shooter, whoever it is, and just throw them. Bam, shoot 4 or 5 three-pointers in a game, buddy. Go wild. Just do all of it for 40 to 48 minutes. And then if you can keep it close in like those final 5 minutes, if you can just, by playing Cinderella ball, keep it close, then just go back to Miami Heat basketball, because that's the part of the game where the Celtics do tend to struggle. And if you can kind of throw a haymaker in those last 5 minutes of each half, then maybe there's something there. That to me would be like my biggest adjustment. I would say, you know what? Everything we did in game one was absolutely wrong. My mistake. We're not doing it. If I'm Erik Spoelstra, just take the whole game plan, crumple it up, throw it in the recycling bin, and say, hey, boys, go out there, have the time of your life. Play pickup basketball, shoot threes. I am not allowing mid-range jumpers. If you take one, you're doing sprints tomorrow. And that's it. And that's it. Just do it. That would be my only adjustment. Does it work? I have no idea, but I know it'll work better than what happened today.
There were so many blown catch and shoot opportunities that it was just flummoxing. And I love that you pointed out Nico, because he had one stretch there where he did exactly that. Like, he caught the ball on the wing, put it up over, I can't recall who at this point, but then missed that shot.
Missed it. Offensive rebound, got it back.
And he nailed it right away. And he took it. And he was like, I don't care.
It was my favorite possession of the game.
The ball was in his hands combined for 2 possessions for less than a second. And he went 1 of 2 from 3-point range. Do it. Like, Haywood caught the ball wide open at one point for the wing and was like, what am I going to do with it? Right. And it's like, Haywood, we know what you're supposed to do. Catch it and shoot it. Catch and shoot.
Instead, he was driving and kicking. That's the thing with Boston's defense is they don't have to help on anybody. There's no rotation. There's no Jimmy Butler there to demand a double team. So, like these drive and kicks that the Heat have and this passing around, it's just doing nothing. It looks great. You get the high passing numbers, but it's not doing much of anything, and you're just wasting time. And so I'm just like, all right, if you're just going to waste time and do these like superficial drive and kicks and not really get anything out of it, then you might as well just jack up a 3-pointer early in the clock and just sort of leave it up to the gods to decide, you know, and just kind of figure it out that way. And then again, maybe if it's close in the last 5 minutes, then you can kind of get more into your game, which we know that the Heat can just sort of downshift into whenever they want to. But we were talking about Tyler Herro before too. Let's get
how many times, like you mentioned Bam before, like putting up threes, like he took 2 today, and he probably had an opportunity to take at least 4 times that. You know, there were too many plays where he was just kind of like holding the ball above the 3-point line, waiting for Tyler or Caleb or somebody to come off screens. It's like, and he's wide open.
Just let it fly, buddy. Just go. It would be
down
one
20.
thing if it was against a defense that could be compromised, but this one it wasn't getting compromised today. So just let it fly instead of just these dumb like side to side movements that don't generate anything, you know? So also hopefully we'll be able to get more time for Duncan Robinson. Again, it just seems like the back is a limitation of some kind, even though, you know, Spoelstra won't admit it. Him only playing 15 minutes in a game where they got outscored by 30 points from 3-point range that tells me that there's some limitations still. Kevin Love played 13 minutes. We don't have to get into how or why, but we did see Spo experiment with Bam and Kevin Love together in the second half. I think that was on purpose to see if that's something that he might want to go to more in this series. And I have a feeling that we probably will, and that Kevin Love will play more than 13 minutes a game going forward in this series. But let's get to our listener questions. Heedle's Kitchen writes in, do we think Tyler Herro will be wearing a Heat jersey next season? You can answer that question if you want, or we could just have a conversation about Tyler Herro and use this as a springboard, David. But
yeah,
it's been a rough
impossible
week for
to
Herro.
determine. Yes, impossible to determine what happens over the offseason, because I think everybody's kind of forgotten that he was this close to being traded for each of the last 3 summers, and that's been the plan as an asset that they thought might be moved and could bring a benefit to another team. It could be included, but they also want somebody for whom the offense comes much more easily. And I think over the last over this game and over the game against the Philadelphia 76ers, you saw how much he can bog down the offense if the shots aren't falling, and how difficult it is to have him out on the floor if you're not getting that kind of production from him. And there are limitations in his game overall. So to the overall question, my guess is probably he is wearing a Heat uniform, but that doesn't mean that he can't continue to improve while he's wearing a Heat uniform. And you hope that improvement comes as early as Wednesday, because they need something much more from him.
Yeah, I don't want to overreact to one playoff game where a lot was going wrong for the Heat, and I like the entire game plan in general was the wrong one, and so
fair enough.
It was. I don't want to overreact to one game, but I just think what I've learned about Tyler Herro, and even just the broader conversation around Tyler Herro and how fans feel about Tyler Herro, is it comes down to expectations. Yeah. And I don't mean to take that off of Tyler Herro's plate, because he's put these expectations on himself, saying that he wants to be in the same conversation as Luka Doncic and Trae Young, and wants to be a starter and wants to be an all-star and all these things. And he should want all these things. And he's worked his tail off to get as close to those things as he possibly can. There are inherent limitations in who Tyler Herro is as a basketball player. And I think we are starting to see those things maybe more frequently than ever, but that's because he's being put in position to basically stress test his basketball skills and maybe his basketball ceiling. Let's really figure out where this ceiling is. And I think there's pros and cons to that. And I think if you're the Heat, I think you're probably realizing where that ceiling is in his game at this stage. Yeah. And what he can, and just within the framework of trying to become that player on this team with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. It would be one thing if he played for the Detroit Pistons, was able to just get up and do whatever he wanted and work through the kinks. And I think a lot of young players, by the way, need that. And Tyler Herro's never really been afforded that. He's always had to fit this role besides them. And I think if he were to really want to lean into that Klay Thompson type of off-ball three-point shooting role, he could be maybe the best player in the league at that job. But he doesn't want to be that player. I don't fault him for not wanting to put that limitation on himself now. And he has to be that player when he plays next to Jimmy and Bam, but it's really hard to kind of toggle between doing that when Jimmy's playing 50 games a season and now he's not even in there for a playoff series. And now it's like, hey, you're actually you're the only guard we have healthy on the roster. So now you just have to be that player that you wanted to be, and you haven't had all that much practice at being that guy. And so I think I'll be really interested to see how Tyler reacts as the series goes on, because I'm not going to take too much judgment off of one game. But I do know this: if the Heat ever had hopes of him being like the lead scorer for a team with finals aspirations, I just don't know that that's going to be Tyler Herro. I don't think that can be him. And so then you have to ask the question of, well, then how do we get that player? Right. If we don't have that player already on the roster, and wherever that leads Tyler Herro in the future, that's where it goes. But if you're the Heat, what you thought might be the answer to that question isn't, and that's okay. But now you need to go find the answer to that question. So I think that's where we're at now. Real quick,
I'm looking. Oh no, go ahead. No, because I know you want to answer a question, but I was looking at video even as we're recording this of this first few shots. A lot of them were wide open and just makeable shots from him. And so
he's got to hit him. Like, he had a good game against Chicago to get the Heat into the playoffs, but it was a bad game against Philly, and it was a bad efficient shooting night against Boston in this one afternoon. Real quick, yes or no? Start DeLon over Tyler? That comes from Mike. No, me neither. Good game from DeLon, but you can't count on it every night. So
starting him over Caleb, yes.
Yeah, maybe. I still don't know. I just okay, do it. Like, does that materially change this game? I don't really think so.
Good. I mean, Caleb's not producing much.
It would be the most
offensively.
surprising thing in NBA history if the Heat won a game because they took Caleb Martin out of the starting lineup and put DeLon Wright into the starting lineup and beat the 64-win Boston Celtics because they made that change of guys who
You
were
wouldn't
immediately
change
out of the
anything
league.
to the lineup.
No, not after one game. I didn't see enough from anybody. Like DeLon Wright still was productive off the bench. It didn't hurt them, and I thought Caleb Martin's going to have to be better whether or not he starts or comes off the bench.
That's
So
for sure.
you know what I mean? It's like, what's the difference to me? Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow us on your podcast app.